Maria, can you say something Japanese to bring us in? Can you say...
Ohayo gozaimasu! Genki desu ka?
I'm keeping that in. That's the opening now.
Hi, guys, and welcome to another episode of your favorite podcast. It's me, your host, Maria, and today with me I have my handsome bitches, Katie and William, and as a guest star on today's episode, we have Lindbergh. Do you just want me to call you Lindbergh, or like, what's your first? I don't know. I don't think I know what your first name is. What are we calling you? I should have thought of this beforehand.
It might be easiest to just say Lindbergh, yeah.
Okay, and as a guest star on today's episode, we have Lindbergh.
Yay!
Welcome.
And the reason is that this time we're not doing a book exactly. Me and Maria and Katie had watched Shogun, the newest adaptation of the fabled book, and we really wanted to talk about the TV show. And we were like, okay, when it ends, we'll talk about it. And then we didn't because we got busy. And Maria read it in the background, so she's read it. And then Lindbergh is she's here almost like an expert witness in that she's read the book multiple times. She watched the TV show.
She's the psychiatrist on the Johnny Depp Amber Heard scenario who's like really hot and has the big like horn-rimmed glasses and is like, yeah, no. And then she just like says really factual, really, really awesome like legal things. And you're just like, oh, she is the professional in this. And the rest of the people are just like shit slanderers.
So that's why Lindbergh is here. She is a honorary handsome bitch. And so for today, that is, yeah, we just really wanted to talk, about the TV series because we thought it was actually really, really good. I had heard of Shogun, because my mother really liked the original TV series from like the 20s.
I'm sorry, what?
No, it's not from the 20s. I'm joking.
It's not from the 20s. It's from the 80s.
Yes.
Oh, but there was an original one from the 80s?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so cringy.
Oh,
It's
really?
Super, yeah, from what everything I've heard about it is that it's super cringy.
Oh my god, all I had to do was Google a photo.
Incredible.
But so when this new series came out, I was like, okay, maybe I'll watch it. And then I saw a few clips on YouTube and I was like, oh, I need to watch this. This is so good looking. Like this is great. And overall, I absolutely loved this series. This is the show that I wish A Song of Ice and Fire had been adapted into, and it isn't. It does politics in a historical setting so much better than every other show out there right now who's trying to do the same thing. And
Will
so
has been so obsessed with it. He's been making vaguely slanderous
No,
Japanese.
okay. No, here's the thing. Before we go into it, I just
He's been
like
cosplaying. He's been cosplaying. That's how much
low
he
and
loves it.
intense they whisper things constantly in the show.
I was first introduced to Shogun as a like concept, let's say, when I was very young because it was a book in my dad's library, and it existed. I don't know why, but all of his books were in his closet. He had a like big walk-in closet, and I would go through there and like pick books from there from time to time. And when I started really getting into a lot of Japanese stuff and a lot of manga and everything, my dad was like, "You should read this book." And I don't know why, but I had tried reading Dune. I realized I was thinking about all of this and I had like a flashback. I had tried reading Dune and I tried reading the first chapter of The Gunslinger by what's his face?
Stephen King.
Stephen King, thank you. And both of the first few chapters I was like, this is boring. Please note, I was like in 5th, 6th grade. I remember going, I don't want to read this. It's probably boring like the rest of the books here. And it's funny because my brother, I remember I was in the car with my brother and he was listening to the audiobook of Shogun and I was like, the narrator, I don't like him. His female voices at the time I thought were very annoying. And I just remember being like, what the fuck is this book about? Because it was like there was a British guy named Blackthorne and I remember the specific scene it was. Now as I was rereading it now, I was like, oh my god, this is the scene I listened to with my brother. But anyway, and I was like, no. And then this show came, completely blew my fucking mind. It is near perfection. I can say as far as a television show goes, and I agree, it is the level of tight and fantastic that I wish Game of Thrones had been, and the politicking is so fantastic. And I'm going to make an argument now that I've read the book.
Ooh.
I think the show is the ultimate form of this story. The book is great. I have I have some slander for the book, but just a little. What would this be if I didn't have slander? A little slander, and the book's a really good time, but the show is the ultimate for me, version of this story. And part of that is, I think, the influence of actual Japanese creative teams that adapted this book. The original one from the 80s was not adapted by a Japanese team. This
You don't
one was,
say.
It was spearheaded by a Japanese team, and specifically the actor who played
Toranaga-sama.
but he like kind of spearheaded this and was the producer, and you can really tell.
Oh,
like,
wow, it shows.
it shows. And I'm also going to bring, because I did some research into the Japanese reception of this TV series.
Oh, that's interesting.
And some of the feedback about like the some book stuff, but there's really interesting difference of opinions in Japan about this show.
Oh.
And so I'll talk about that as well. I will send Will and link the videos that I watched that I got. It was a Japanese creator who translated a bunch of Japanese tweets dealing with the different perspectives on the book. Anyway, so we'll go into that, but I enjoyed both. What's his name? I forgot his name. Clavell, a really interesting and great writer. Some issues with the way he translates Japanese. Everyone says "ne" a bunch of times in their head. Blackthorne will be like, "That's the truth of it, ne," and I'm like, "Blackthorne, what the fuck?"
That's not how you say.
And it happens 5 times a page. Like, and it's funny because one of the comments I read about when the book came out that Japanese had was how clunky some of the Japanese in it is, and how everyone just says "ne" all the time.
Dude, but you know what's really funny? You know what's like genuinely tickling the innards of myself right now as you say that is the fact me as well as every other weeaboo in the early 2000s wrote fan fiction using that overuse.
Ne.
It was like,
Actually, that's funny.
Ne.
All right, Katie, what were your thoughts?
I just watched the show really low key with my husband, and we just like did it after a really long day. And so I didn't really, and like while like, you know, having a nice like nightcap and eating some yummy whatever cheap American food we ate. But the point is I didn't really go into this with an analytical mindset. And so that being said, I have very little like background information. So I'm just coming at it from a straight story perspective / storytelling / media perspective. And what I have to say is, yeah, it's a very clean story. I really like, I think there's very little you can nitpick about the TV show itself on like, I mean, not that I'm like a audio person, so I can be like, oh yeah, technically in episode 3, the audio mixing was blah, 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 blah. I can't say any of that stuff. But just from my like layman's perspective, I feel like the show started out really, really good. But there's one thing that I think there's only one singular problem I have. One problem. And so I'll just say that as like the critique, I suppose. And when I say one singular problem, I mean one big problem. And I just feel like I feel like I'll get flack for it because I'm talking about Blackthorne and he's like, you know, like, as people might say, he's like the white man in the not like in the other culture, other religion, other world. Well, actually not really other religion. I don't know. Debatable world. But I felt like he was supposed to be a really main character towards the beginning. There's a lot of like focus on him and then it really lulls and it gets off him for a couple of episodes. And that's fine, I suppose. But it really did draw away from the tension building. And there was like it was specifically like, I mean, maybe not specifically, but it was like episodes 4 to 6 thereabouts where I was just like, it was just 2 or 3 episodes where I was like, this is losing me. There's no good climactic like music moments with turns in storyline. There's no dramatic betrayals that I didn't really like, you know, like I didn't need drama per se, but there was just nothing special about those episodes. And if there was, it's vastly hidden in between all of the fluff in between. And so once those go by, all I have to say is that basically episodes 8 onwards were so intensely artistically perfect that like it made me consistently cry and feel in tune with the earth and my artistic self for the first time in a while.
Your wah.
Yeah, like it was literally magnificent. It was the episode in Game of Thrones where Cersei blew up the sect. It's because I don't care about the show to book shit. Fuck that shit. And I don't care about the plot. Fuck that shit. I mean, orchestrated from scene to scene. Music, acting, I think it was absolutely beautiful. From at the very least, notably 8 to 10. And so I think the show's really good.
My background with the book is that I was in my classics era. I was reading only classical works, and then I was like, why aren't there any modern classics? Or are there? So I Googled, and I got Shogun. And I thought it was going to be a stupid book, and I read it, and it blew my mind. This is about 5 years ago, maybe. I don't know time. I just loved the book. I have had no one to talk about the book with. Then I heard they were going to do a show adaptation, and I was like, this is going to be shit.
The last one was.
I waited with bated breath, and then it just looked better and better and better. And then I watched the show, and it was the show adaptation I never expected that we would get from this book. They did such a gosh darn good job. I can't believe how they managed to get this book into a banging good TV show.
It's honestly, I agree, incredible how they whittled away, because there's a lot of good that they had to cut to get us to this point. Now there's some stuff that they cut that thank God they cut, because I think it needed to be cut. Let me tell you, there's a lot of focus in the first third of the book about Blackthorne's penis.
Yes! Oh my god! I'm kind of surprised the penis never made a guest appearance on the show, actually.
With how much they talk about it, an old lady literally says, I can die happy now that I've seen it. So, like...
Yeah! Because it's so big!
And she got to see it erect. That's what she wanted. She saw him naked, and she was like... My wish is to see it fully erect, and then she gets to see it, and she's like, I can die happy now. And I was like, I paused the book, and I looked at my brother, and I'm like, thank God, because he's read it. I was like, thank God they cut out the Blackthorne penis stuff.
I actually kind of wish they kept it in now. Like, that sounds great. That's so fucking dumb.
No,
It just goes to show, writers, you can be penis obsessed and still become a modern classic that people respect and gets turned into a prestige television show. I think probably we should give a little bit of a summary of the main premise. And I'm actually not sure how we want to go through this. Do we want to do it in our normal going through the plot way? Or do we want to try doing what we did with Dune, where we did it more based off of like topics? Because the series, it's a really long book. It's like 54
hours.
And the series is also like pretty long.
We'll start with basic premise, and then I think potentially focusing on just topics, and then also the differences, like Lindbergh and I discussing what's different, like telling you guys what the book did that was different, and then getting your feedback and how it made, because I think for the most part, almost every single change was for the benefit of the story, and just like if they had kept in everything, it just would have been too bloated. So the basic premise of this book is that a guy named Clavell decided to rewrite the start of the Tokugawa era of Japanese history. Not rewrite. He wrote a fantastical version. This is considered historical fiction. It's kind of like historical fan fiction. That's exactly what this is.
It's like if a Japanese person decided to write an autobiography or an early American history textbook, but decided to call him George Joshington. Like, it's very funny that these are historical figures with the wrong name. So I kind of wondered what like Japanese people thought of it.
Instead of Ieyasu Tokugawa, we have Yoshi Toranaga. Instead of Oda Nobunaga, we have Goroda. And so a lot of the names, Yoshida turned into Yoshido. But anyway, what he was actually looking at, and what the show and the book focus on, is a English pilot who got swept ashore in Japan and ended up weirdly involved with the politics and getting really close to one of the daimyos. In the book, it's Toranaga. In actual history, it was Tokugawa, and ended up being an advisor and helping train some people in history. It was canons, and one of the best things, not one of the best things, but the show kind of fixes that and makes it canons. Now, what Clavell did was he made Old Blackthorne, our fictional version of the actual dude who rocked up, way more important, but it makes for a very compelling story, and it's basically the end of a warring period well, not in history a warring period, but there'd been like a couple of years of peace, and it's the shift from that into a new era of Japan. So it's a moment of it's a bottleneck moment, and so the book and show have a lot of political intrigue. There's the Portuguese are present. They've got some Christian daimyos. Trade is hip hop happening, and there's never been an Englishman to set foot on Japanese soil, and here rocks up Blackthorne.
The Anjin. He's the pilot of a ship, by the way. He's not like a pilot of a plane. This is in whatever time period Maria said that I already forgot.
1600.
Tokugawa fully takes over power in 1603, so 1602 is exactly it.
There's a variety of other characters too. So the main guy, the liege lord, is Toranaga-sama, played by, I don't know the actor's name, but he's fantastic in the show.
Hiroyuki Sanada Hiroyuki.
And Toranaga-sama is such a great character because he's very conniving, but in a way that he's actually smart. Like, so often we're told conniving characters are smart and then they just do really boring normal things, but he's really intelligent. There's and he's not intelligent in a way that makes him unsympathetic. Like, this book doesn't really have a villain who does terrible things, but you're still very much on Toranaga's side pretty much throughout the entire series. I'm going to talk about it as a series because that's what I did watch. Though through Lindbergh and Maria, I now have like a weird amount of knowledge about the book as well. And like he's such a well-played character and he's such a smart person. We also have Mariko-sama.
She is like the epitome of like the Japanese, the lady samurai, because the and a woman of the samurai class. She has like all the composure, the wit, the intelligence. She's great at poetry, but she's also a Christian, and she also is based on an actual historical figure who never met an English pilot in her life, but that's not the point.
Nor had the pleasure of his company, apparently.
Or penis.
But could also speak all the different languages, because Mariko can speak Portuguese, Latin, and Japanese. She's one of the only Japanese who can speak all three very, very fluently. And she enters our story by being a translator for Toranaga while he converses with old Blackthorne. And she is an excellent character. And her and Blackthorne are very fond of each other. And depending on whether you watched the show or read the book, it is a very explicit romance with like a lot of stuff, or it is a very quiet, soft background thing that has.
Okay, so it's very explicit in the book, is what you're saying.
Oh my god, it's so explicit. They say "I love you," I love thee. They have a month-long or 2-month-long like sex vacation while they travel to Edo. Like, it's too much. It's too much. She's also very smart. She can connive with the best of them. In the show and in the book, she is one of Toranaga's most valued vassals, and he trusts her with a lot. And there's a couple of points in the book where that's even more explicit, where he asks her for her thoughts and asks her for her advice without asking for her advice. And so she's just a really fascinating character that's super complex and great. She's at her best when she isn't like fawning over Blackthorne, though. So,
I could imagine in the book that would be very annoying if she's fawning.
Well, when you have a penis the size of,
I mean, look, when all the old ladies faint, they've had all the experience in the world, haven't they?
The other main player is Yabushi, I think is his name.
Yabushige in the show. He's named Yabu, just Yabu in the book, which the Japanese went, that's not anything we would call, like, that would be an official name for someone from that period. So they fixed a lot of names. There's a character named Naga in the book that they gave, and like, I can't remember what his full name is, but it's Toranaga's son. Yeah. And then, so Yabu in the book becomes Yabushige in the show. And Yabushige is the head of the Kishigi clan, and what a wild fucking man.
I have a crush on him.
That's wild. The show and the book have this amazing thing of presenting you someone who's really fucked up, but then humanizing them and making them someone that you're like, oh man, in the end, Yabushige, I love you. And it's just this, both of them deal with complicated characters. A lot of modern books, I feel like, have fallen into the trap of their characters have to be wholeheartedly, completely good.
They're becoming archetypes where it's black and white, or there's like a lot of like, in so many of the romantasy things we read, there's a character that's supposed to be complicated. Instead, they overly simplify and dumb it down. And they're like, oh, but they're this way because of X, Y, and Z. But they say it in that way to support very like not like it supports the wrong thing. Instead of showing how complex things can come together to make someone human, it says, oh, but that's the excuse for this behavior.
Yeah, you can do a very, very bad thing if your reasons are good enough.
Yeah, exactly. But that's not the message. The message should definitely be, you're just a human. Humans do bad things.
And they're complex and complicated, and nothing is straightforward. And the show does that less so in the show with Omi. Omi is the, for those of you that have watched the show and read the book, the guy who pees on Blackthorne at the start.
It's so funny.
The book, better than the show, really, like, him and Blackthorne kind of become friends halfway through. But again, it is just Clavell and the show's ability to take a character that presents, and you think, I'm gonna hate this guy the whole time, and then it's like, no. You're gonna be sad at the end.
I think the show, it really gives the characters room to, it gives the viewer or the reader the ability to give you space to read these characters as people in their own right, and it doesn't feel a need to judge them necessarily. So like Yabushibe, like he starts off the series boiling someone alive when he doesn't need to, and yet he's like such a scoundrel at the same time, and he's so charismatic and charming. Or Omi starts off by peeing on Blackthorne's head, but like, you know, there's more there, and like we'll especially talk about this when it comes to Buntaro. There's an extent to which I really like this approach to characters, because when you otherize people who do bad things, it makes it harder in real life for people to admit when they've done bad things or think of themselves as villains. It essentializes them. And I think another way that the book achieves this, though, without being like, well, you know, without being abuse apologia, essentially, is that, you know, it creates this sense that everybody has their own agency and their own ways of thinking about things. And you see this in, like, kind of the plotting between the different characters. Everybody is kind of out for themselves within a reasonable respect. And that's one of the things I actually really liked about its take on Japanese culture that we'll talk about a little bit later.
The biggest change for me from book to show is that Yabu is even grayer in the book. Like, he is a pretty loathsome character with a few redeeming features. And I think they made a very good choice in making him like the somewhat lovable rogue in the TV show, because he becomes a more engaging character that way in TV form, whilst a lot of his character growth in the books come from internal
Silent
monologue
moments.
and things you wouldn't see in a show.
One thing that I loved about that you get in the book from Yabushige is how much he respects and loves his wife.
Yeah, I love that.
He doesn't even have a wife.
Yeah, he doesn't at all. And Omi doesn't have his wife, but also really loves his wife Midori. Like, there's a lot of loving of wives. Toranaga loves all of his wives. One of his favorites is a Buddhist nun who has a lovely scene.
There is so much respect of spouses, and they keep them as their personal advisors. And
It's funny that you say that, because I felt like there was not a message per se, but there was a theme building with women, and I don't feel like it was really fully maturized in the show.
I actually do. We'll talk about it more when it comes to Mariko, because that was one of the things I actually really appreciated, and I don't know how much of it is the book versus the TV series, but there is a real respect and, more than anything, interest in the role of women and their place in society and how they view themselves and how they navigate a culture that might be seen from the outside as like very submissive, but there it isn't. And while we're talking about women, we have to talk about the best character on this show.
Fujiko!
Fuji is a character who is Blackthorne's like consort wife. She's basically there to give him a family name and to give him some legitimacy in the household.
She's the lady of his house, yeah.
She's so great. She's such wifey material.
Will has been obsessed with her since day one. Will has not stopped talking about her. That's his new anime waifu.
I never understood when people said anime waifu. I was like, this doesn't resonate with me. She is waifu. She is my favorite character. She has like such a quiet strength to her. She's
Dude.
so adorable.
Her outfits are beautiful.
Especially in that last episode.
Dude, that blue outfit.
Kimono murder me. Murder me.
The scene with them letting the ashes go, also my second top 3 scene in the entire piece.
I choose to believe they stay married at the end. I don't care what you say. You can't change my mind.
In the book, Fujiko's like, he should marry Omi's wife. And Kiku should be his consort.
No.
I did not think I was going to like John Blackthorne, even an iota, a single time, ever. And then, honestly, from after Mariko's death, stuff, I don't know. After a certain point in the show, I was like, this isn't deserved. I mean, it is deserved, technically, but like I don't feel, again, there were episodes where we missed him in the show a little bit, where he like really faded into the background, which again, theoretically fine, but then I don't care as much about him.
I think this is actually a good time to talk about how this story has the shape of a white savior story, but it really isn't one at all. And I actually agree with Katie. I feel like the series kind of loses track of him, and I don't know if that's the case in the book. I think in certain ways, the Japanese production made it so much about the Japanese characters, which is fine. But narratively speaking, he kind of gets lost. He also changes personality about halfway through. What I really liked about the way that Blackthorne was introduced is he just immediately is like, fuck Catholics. Like, you get the sense for, like, he is a man of intent and will, which he puts onto the world. I like that they didn't try to be like, well, all cultures are good. He's like, no, I'm a man from the 1600s. Fuck Catholics all the way. I liked that. And then about 3 or 4 episodes in, he stops being that character and starts being, oh, I love the sea and I love freedom, and that's my big thing.
It's like, what? Okay, so you're trying to make him a wanderlust character? Come now. I thought he was a man full of ambition. That's the way he was portrayed in the first several episodes.
Well, and Lindbergh was telling me that that's how he's portrayed more in the book, right?
Yeah, he's portrayed as a very, he is very driven to his own success. He wants to become rich. He wants to become famous. He wants to be the John Drake who discovered Asia, basically. And when you cut that bit out, and you also cut out a lot of the bits where he politics with the Portuguese, I can see how he kind of fades a little bit, and also a lot of his character growth comes from internal monologue in the book. Like, everything is about how he interprets and internalizes Japanese society and how gradually his thinking changes.
That's a huge thing in the book.
Because he doesn't actually do much.
He doesn't. But he's the viewpoint from which we see a lot of it, and you also get him, like, coming to terms with, like, a lot of the Japanese cultural stuff, becoming into bathing, where at the start he was like, I don't want to be bathed, and then like going from hating Japanese food to liking Japanese food, and hitting a moment where he goes, I'm not a barbarian, I am samurai, I am Hatamoto. And so that's also this huge arc he goes on that you don't get at all in the show. But it's one of the things that, like, it had to be cut. The amount of time you would have to spend on that to really hammer that point home, I don't think you could have done in 10 episodes.
I also feel like the message was wishy-washy a little bit with, like, some things, like some plot points. So, for example, like you said with the bath thing. So, like, I really liked the introduction of the concept that he's like, oh, no, I'm not going to bath. I'll catch the whatever. And I forget what it is.
The flux.
Yeah, the flux, exactly. And it's like there's so much dirty water with all that stuff over there that no wonder he doesn't want to take a bath. It's not I'm an unclean barbarian thing. It's environmentally and culturally, we have different expectations in this other place. So I really like that setup. But then there were certain things that happened that went back and forth, which kind of worked. But then also I felt like I don't want to say muddied the message, because there's no message per se. But like for example, the pheasant or whatever it is that he hangs to rot, like that whole thing, I thought it was very interesting how it turned out. But I also thought, what's the message in the episode then?
In the book, he wants to hang the bird to mature, And the Japanese, they don't eat meat, so they can't stand the smell. It's offensive to them. And so the gardener takes it down, and he then has to be killed because, And the lesson for Blackthorne is that he is responsible. At first, he blames Fujiko for killing the gardener. But the lesson is that he is responsible because he forbade them from touching the bird.
And they amp it up in the show where he specifically says, don't touch or die. Like, if touch, die. In the book, he doesn't specifically say, die. He just says kinjiro. Like, it's forbidden, don't do it. And so what they did in the show was they made it a little bit more explicit that he is culpable and at fault for that. And one of the things I will say is, book him comes to terms with it in a much more like explicit way than show him does. Oftentimes I preferred book Blackthorne to show Blackthorne, and it was just because of how much, like, there's so much happening in his head that really gives you an idea of what's happening. And unfortunately, you get a lot of the same dialogue, but without all the head stuff. Blackthorne comes across a little. He's the one character that I would say is a little bit worse in the show because of that.
The other thing is, I feel like the show kind of gets confused as to his arc. So there's a point halfway through, once he's been civilized, where he goes back to see his his crew. And it's like he sees that they're like, they're carousing and drunk, and they're with women and prostitutes and stuff,
and they're dirty. And
it's supposed to be a moment of like, oh, I'm no longer that barbarian. And I didn't really feel like that made a ton of sense. It felt like, but they've just been treated badly. It's not like they're fundamentally more barbarian. So I wonder if that's something that was in the book that didn't translate exactly to the show.
They chose that. They were originally in a nice house on the edge of town with the shoji screens, and they hated it. So they go into, and in the book they go into this, they don't touch it on the show, an Etta village, the like bottom, the untouchables, if we're going to use a word, of society.
The butchers, the executioners, the leather workers, like the lowest social class there is, they are untouchables. And the Westerners, they want to live there because the squalor reminds them of home.
And so the idea is the Japanese wanted them to bathe. They wanted them to not drink a ton of alcohol. They didn't want them to eat meat. And all of this stuff that Blackthorne comes to terms with and begins to appreciate, his crew rejected. And when they asked, can we live in the Etta village? It's home. They were told yes, and the Etta, because they butcher and they deal with tanning, gave them meat in the book so they could eat their meat. They were allowed to have the prostitutes.
I think we really needed that for not that you need it terribly, because it does still come through that this is just their adaptation to their surroundings, but it not elegantly enough to infer any of that. But also that leads me into my third favorite scene. No, I should say, no, it's my fourth favorite scene. I have four favorite scenes.
There's so many good scenes.
I can't exclude this one. I was going to exclude it, but I can't. When he goes before them and he's like, I'm not them, but I'm not you. I thought the actor did an amazing job expressing that.
I had a hard time coming to terms with Blackthorne in the show because I just hate that actor. And
why do you hate him?
It's because I have PTSD. He played
Persuasion.
He was in Persuasion, and he played my darling Wentworth, and he was such terrible. Yes, and he was a terrible fucking Wentworth. He was garbage, and I hated it. He's like this like gruff, and so like I just looked at him and I'm like, you and your smug fucking face with your smug voice, and
he just makes me think of what's his face and makes me hot for him. Tom Hardy.
I would have been more okay with Tom Hardy.
Is it Tom Hardy that I'm thinking of?
I think they should have gotten an older actor to play him. That actor just looked, the entire time I was like, are you 28? Blackthorne's supposed to be like 36.
So actually that speaks to another thing, which is that I felt like the show kind of treated him a little bit too much as the audience surrogate. And I understand that you always want an audience surrogate when you're going into a new culture to explore it. And the show doesn't authorize the Japanese characters really, because they are all so varied and complex, and there's a respect for their culture there. But it is sort of treated like white people culture of that time is white people culture of this time, or an unmarked, so to speak. And I wish they hadn't done that as much. I wish they had started there a little bit and then kind of explored over time how like, oh no, like the Japanese views on homosexuality are much closer to ours now than they were then. I actually liked how anti-Catholic he was at the time, because it's like, yeah, that is a weird thing. Like, their culture was not our culture. It would be just as alien to us to go to England at that time period as it would be to go to Edo.
Yeah, like he's a Protestant, just a few generations after the schism with the Catholic Church. So basically, like, that war was serious. They killed each other without prejudice. And the show doesn't quite hit on that.
Market on that.
Yep.
There's not enough
That's
ire,
my
I would think.
one loss, my one
Yeah.
big loss, actually.
The thing that I also think that they do in the book is what you were just saying, William, is they talk about what life was like. Now, there's some of this that I don't, just because we've looked at like the English dislike of bathing and stuff like that, but he talks about life in England and how fleas and things like that were just the punishments from gods, the difference in medicine, and so England is as bizarre in the book as, because there's a point where he's like, I don't want to go back. This is better on a day-to-day life basis.
Yeah.
Like, and yet he still has problems with the, like, that a baby would be killed because of something its father did. And so there's times when he's like, Japan's better, England's better. But in both cases, there is an alienness to both cultures from a modern perspective.
Yeah. The point isn't really that a normal Englishman comes to Japan and sees the weird culture. The point is that he comes to Japan and perceives the culture as extremely weird. And then with time, he sees how strange England is as well.
Do you think that the show would have benefited from showing either his life or life in general in England or someplace else prior, and then that have a slower merge into the new plot line? Or
So
I don't think so, but
Plot-wise, I think that would have been
horrible.
a detriment.
Yeah.
And I think what the show really tried to do was correct some of the historical inaccuracies that the book had and some of the ways where it wasn't. And I think part of that is not going too hard because, again, what we've learned, like, Britain was like, they did just throw shit out into the street and stuff like that, and there was a lot of things that they but I think that Clavell falls into some of the pitfalls about what we think about Britain from that time period versus what is actual. So I think it's actually smart of them not to go too hard into that. Also, a huge portion of their, like, this was made in Hollywood. How hard are they going to go at like otherizing the Westerners?
I think also there was a real interest in this production about the Japanese characters and their motivations. And like, it's interesting because Lindbergh had been telling me that Omi in the show or in the book is a very kind of active character who does a lot of things and he's plotting against his uncle, and a lot of that gets cut because Yabushiba is the more plotty one in the show, and that kind of makes sense because the Omi stuff is almost a little bit of a cul-de-sac. It doesn't change the big events, and so it makes sense to cut it. And I think that's kind of the thing, is when you're dealing with a book that large, you kind of have to choose what you're going to focus on.
Yep.
And him being, and England being as alien to us as Japan would be to us is very valuable, but it's not necessary to the function of the show.
It is not. And I think that overall as an adaptation is where they thrived, is they really whittled the plot down to the, like, if you were going to summarize what happens in the book, you would get most of the show beats. There's a couple, like Toranaga's son doesn't die, but they use that to replace something else that they cut out. And it also brings a nice emotional moment for Toranaga that I think is valuable. But for the most part, it is wildly like the major beats of the book, and for the most part in the right order. There's only one scene where they took it from earlier and then added it to the very end, which was super smart. It's such a cathartic moment.
Scene? What is that?
Where he goes to commit seppuku. That happens much earlier. When
the timing of this was like it like, as in he goes to do that prior to her doing what she does.
Toranaga never threatens to kill the village because that's not what happens. What happens is when he first comes back to Anjiru, the Izu, Yabushige is like, or Yabu's like, you have 6 months to learn Japanese, otherwise I'm killing the village. Just to make sure that everyone in the village makes sure to teach you Japanese. And he's like, absolutely not. I'm not having that over my head. And so he goes and he has like this because he keeps fighting with Mariko. There's this great moment where Mariko's like, you need to embrace Japan as the Japanese. If you keep trying to do things your way, you're gonna not do. And because he says, I can't live with this. And then she goes, so die. That's the Japanese thing to do. And he's like, but I'm Christian. And then he has this moment where he's like, I can use my death to benefit. And he was like, martyrdom.
So he gets it. So he gets the Mariko mindset.
A huge thing in the book is him beginning to have a inner harmony, becoming Japanese in mindset. And so he goes in front of Omi, Yabushige, and Yabushige's one advisor. He's like, then I'll kill myself. And he goes and he means to, just like in the show, he means to do it. Omi grabs him at the last second. And it's such a powerful scene. Because he can't walk afterwards. He's so like, he was prepared for death, and his view of life afterwards is completely different.
Oh, that's so cool.
But moving it to the end is a really powerful, it's the cathartic moment we need for Blackthorne's character.
Yes.
Unfortunately, a huge problem that happens in the show, because they were focused so much on the Japanese, because like the major plot points are the Japanese plot points, throughout the entire second half of the book, the majority of his plot points are like, maybe Toranaga will let me have a navy, and I'm gonna sleep with Mariko and tell her how much I love in her.
And I want to kill the black ship.
And I want to kill the black ship. Fuck the priests. We hate priests. And so he's
living the life after that. He's living the true life.
To give him a cathartic moment, because at the end, that's not just Mariko dying. They moved that scene to the end.
It recontextualizes it, and I almost like the way that you're describing it in the book more, because that speaks more to his personal growth.
Yeah.
In the show, I felt like it was a little bit muddled, that like maybe he's just kind of doing this out of grief or desperation. I didn't necessarily feel that it was
I would
like...
agree.
So, I mean, and that's one of the things I think, again, is that his story gets a little bit muddled. It
His
works.
is the weakest.
There's things in the series that shouldn't work, but they work because the acting's so good. Even the music at certain points. There's 2 scenes in episode 8 where
Yes.
where the music is fucking fantastic.
Which
and
parts?
It's the tea room scene and the one where his main lieutenant kills himself. Those 2 scenes are made by the music, because the show has such a level of like, it makes all the emotion, everybody's kind of like this all the time. It's very low level, so you're trying to kind of piece out the intricacies and the nuances and the little details, and then the music just gives it so much weight. And we'll talk about this with the ending, because I think the ending is really brilliant. There are things that are like, even when it's a little bit muddled, it's so well acted. There's such a genuine emotion. You've come to care for these characters. You miss Mariko, you're grieving her, and so like, and you kind of, so like, there are things that sometimes I let the series slide a little bit because it felt emotionally true, even if logically it might have been tweaked a little.
And I think that's why that thing happens at the end, because for, I think, the average viewer who is watching, it's the cathartic moment. Like, it's the release of the catharsis they need for Blackthorne, and they need that at the end. It's, you're right, from a, like, character arc thematic point of view, having it play out how it does in the book means more, but I think like it just, as that cathartic emotional point that you need for him, it functions really well.
If he didn't do that, if he had not had that scene with Toranaga in the show, I would have felt as if a balloon had just let out all its air with nothing.
You need a confrontation.
That's why it had to be there.
And the thing is, the themes of the show so much have been about death and the place of death in Japanese culture, and I'm a little bit like,
it's very muddied. It's very muddied, I think. I think what really makes or breaks that particular message, and also the accommodation of oneself to different cultures, is just completely lost through the internal dialogue that you just don't get through the show, unfortunately. There's only so much you can represent. I think, and this is, everyone, my number 1 favorite scene in the entire show. Number 1 favorite scene. And I think it is best represented, what you ladies are talking about, is the drinking scene between John Blackthorne and
Buntaro.
Thank you. I was going to say Boru, and I was like, that's not his name. Buntaro. The drinking scene between those two is one of the, I know this is dumb maybe, but I personally think this is one of the best scenes I've seen in the past 3 years of movies and TV shows.
So we should explain. Buntaro is Mariko Sama's husband. And early on, you're like, oh, there's something weird. She's acting a little bit like an abused wife around him. And then he has like a really wonderful, like, heroic moment where he's like makes a last stand for Toranaga-sama so he can get away. And it's such a great, it's a great scene because like Toranaga-sama just like, he just bows to him and he bows back.
And Blackthorne's like, well, let's go back. We can get him. We can get him. And they're like, no, to die for your liege lord is honor. And Toranaga bows, like, it nods towards him. And then, Buntaro's like, I got you.
Yeah, it's such a great moment of like, oh, and then later he comes back and he hadn't died. And he beats Mariko because he got real drunk or whatever. And Buntaro is a fascinating character because this is kind of what we were talking about like the characters do bad things, but then the narrative doesn't completely discard them or make them one-dimensional. Buntaro is like, I think partly it's because his actor is so expressive. Buntaro just like he has so much pathos as a human, and yet the show never tries to apologize for what he did. And so when he comes back, he's very like, Anjin, he's a barbarian, blah, blah, blah. And there's a scene where him and Anjin essentially get into like a dick measuring contest while they're drunk. And that's what Katie is talking about.
It's such a good scene, though. There's between the acting and between the like subtle little thing. The actor for Buntaro, but also the writing for Buntaro, or whatever combination of the two is required that gave us this result, is so good because there's such a it's definitely a political scene. Like, and I mean politics is in social politics. It's because like there is like this give and take of like trying to man up in the most basic way, but also not. And I just think it's so. Everyone, go watch the show if you haven't.
Yeah,
it is excellent.
It seems like this that I think are so. One of the things I said to William while I was reading the book is that while a lot of the internal monologues give a lot of richness and color and add, it can sometimes be a little much and slow down the pace of the book. It is great. I love like a lot of the character development that happens as characters realize stuff, but it takes up a lot of page space. This book, if you would just cut like about 80% of the internal monologues, this book would be like 35 hours.
Yeah, you cut about half of it just straight off.
What is happening would still be really good. And that's what the show does, is there are scenes, because I happen to think that the internal monologue of this scene weakens it a little bit compared to how it plays out in the show. For me, the show scene was much more powerful because I wasn't getting what was happening in the characters' heads. And it's a lot of that tension. There are times where we talk about another scene where this is super at play is the Willow World scene. By not being in the characters' heads, not knowing what they're thinking, it adds to the mystery and because a lot of times things that are, you're like, ooh, what's happening in the show? Ooh, this tension. The characters are just telling you in the book. They're like Kiku's like, I'm nervous. I wonder if he's okay. I wonder if this like is the right thing to do. And in the show, Kiku's just like
that ruins the tension.
Yeah, and there's literally a scene where Kiku asks Mariko, it's real dark in there. You can go in there if you want. And Mariko has to be like, no, where in the show you're like, what happened? Who was in the room? And it adds to that like delicious tension. And there are places like with Blackthorne's backstory where I think it does make it weaker because we don't get a lot of that character arc and stuff that's happening internally. So it's really interesting how because it's a visual medium, a lot of that had to be cut, but I think in a lot of ways it made something stronger, something's a little bit weaker. But those are two places, and so I loved the drinking scene. The one thing, and I liked that they made it so, because Buntaro shoots the arrows before he's drunk in the, like, actually drunk in the book, and I like that he hit those targets blasted out of his mind, barely able to stand
I
straight.
did too. That's kind of
sexy.
It's
such a power move. You also lose, and I think this adds to it, because one of the things you learn about Buntaro in the book is part of his huge problem with his marriage with Mariko is he really loves her, and he just wants any emotional reaction from her. Happiness,
that
sadness.
comes through in the show.
Yeah.
That comes through in the show. I feel bad for him in the show. The tea scene broke
It's-
my heart, and
Yeah.
I actually was angry that she didn't love him.
It's wild because I
But
understand it.
also,
She
I wouldn't go
never
that far, but
part of the problem is he said that you don't get in the show, but adds context, is after her family, or you don't get it in detail, after her family had the whole like her dad killed Garoda and utter shame, he sends her away for 8 years into the north, into the snow, and she is so you don't have the guts to kill me, you don't have the guts to let me live as your wife, and you just send me away. And she comes back from that experience as ice. Like she took on her
that
location.
changes so much.
She feels he forced her to live on in shame.
Because she wanted to die, he wouldn't grant that, but he also wouldn't let her like do her job, because like she thrives on like her duty and that stuff. So she was denied her death.
That
and
changes the narrative.
And he did it to keep her safe and to keep her from other people's scorn and shame. So both of them are coming from a really, and then she comes back and she's just this ice queen, and he's like, I hate this. I love her. I want something out of her. And so it drives him to terrible. And, like, he's not a good character. The book doesn't try and make you think he's a good character. The show does not try and make you think he's a good character.
The show is a bit more sympathetic than the book, I feel.
It is more sympathetic. The book is still a bit harsh.
The book basically calls him a violent ape all the time until towards the end when you start to understand why he is this way.
And then the show, like, I'm sorry, the tea scene alone gives you sympathy towards him. There's and maybe that was not intended, but the actor like just fucking threw it out of the park.
there's another part of this that you guys kind of need to understand the context of, which is that Buntaro looks uncannily like a samurai version of Katie's husband. He looks it's really similar, and so there might be a little bit of sympathy going on there.
It is actually like like it's if Juan lost 50 pounds and was vaguely Asian, just a little bit,
and had the bald spot with the Q.
honestly, if he just shaved his head in a weird way and lost 50 pounds, he would look like Buntaro, and that like throws me off a little.
On top of that, one of the things, because the tea ceremony is where you begin to have sympathy for Buntaro in the book.
Well, for me in the show, that's the first time
yeah.
I had sympathy for him.
The thing that's there that I kind of wish they had is, but I understand why they had to do it this way. Mariko loves the tea ceremony. Like, she cries at its perfection. She tells him it was a beautiful experience. Like, I wish someone else had been here to experience how beautiful this was. And he's like, what if we go into... When he says, what if we go into death together? She goes, yes. Can we do it now? And he says, no, we can't do it now. We have to wait. And she goes, she says, I would go into death with you tomorrow, tonight, anytime. And he's like, we can't do it now. We have to wait after all of this is done, once we've done our service to our Lord. And she goes, you're right. I'm being selfish. And it's this beautiful scene of these two people who, they hate each other because of the situations they were forced in by the people who arranged their marriage, who knew what was going to happen. Like, her father knew what was happening and married her off to Buntaro so she would be safe. It wasn't she didn't want to leave her family, so she came in with her ill will. This marriage wasn't something he wanted. And then after the shame of the Akechi clan, now he has a wife who is cold. Like, all of this stuff turns this into two people who might have potentially been happy at a different point, but because of how things played out, ended up having to hate each other, despite the fact that both have qualities the other really admires. He admires that she is the perfection of a lady. He admires her charm and her wit and her ability to like see through things, but it wishes he could see it. And he's so happy in this moment seeing her cry and seeing a genuine emotion from her. He takes a leaf from the beautiful flower arrangement he made. He picks the tear off of her cheek so that he can have it on the leaf. And like
that gave me chills. That literally gave me chills.
The tea scene in the book is, because in the show it's an excellent scene. It is incredible, but in the book it is even sweeter and bittersweet, because these two characters, there's no way for them to be happy together, and the option of them to die with each other, because after this point she goes on a sex vacation with
okay, you ruined it for me a little there.
In the show, you don't quite have that context of the tragedy of their marriage that you're talking about.
And part of it is because she's like, I hate you. I don't ever want to see you. I never want to die with you. I want to escape you. And I'm like, man.
I feel a little bit like the show made Mariko into a more perfect victim. Like, it is more streamlined, showing her abuse without all the context behind it. And then during the tea scene, that is like her moment to say what's in her heart in the show. Whereas in the book, like the Japanese culture portrayed, is that you don't say what's in your heart. That's just not something you do. So they agree to die because Mariko wants to die. That is the only way she can regain her honor. Like, she sees that as the end of the road for her, no matter what.
I think with the context of the tragedy of their marriage, that is a really beautiful scene that you're describing in the book. But in the show, you know, kind of like what Lindbergh was saying, it's much more about the abuse and so there's a certain amount of like, it would have felt a little bit more apologetic if she had been like, okay, let's die in this moment. It would have been a little bit more.
Well, there's none of that background.
Yeah, and that just has to do with the time involved and like what focus have been placed.
I think it's mismanagement of the time, because think of all that time that was focused on, in general, the political machinations of Japan, not John Blackthorne.
But that's the story.
Yeah.
That's the book gives that just as much time, if not more.
I get that. I get it. I felt like there was just, I think between...
You get more.
I think, funnily enough, the more personable relationships within the show itself were muddied, even though they are very well portrayed. I'm not saying they're poorly portrayed. I'm just saying that I think the long-term effects of their interactions with each other have become quite difficult to understand the growth from, due to the lull in those episodes I have brought up.
So the scenes with Buntaro, again, in a TV show, you can count like on one hand how many he gets before this tea, or on two hands, how many he gets before this tea ceremony. And so like 1/10 of his screen time is devoted to an incident where he beats his wife and he beats Mariko. So it wouldn't really make sense. Like, you, again, you're just missing all this context, and that really, you need that context for that beautiful moment you're talking about.
Yeah, they cut out all the bits where she dishonors him, where she goads him, because she wants him to kill her. She wants to die.
She's hoping to get him angry enough. Yeah, and she goes, I know he just wants me to like smile and be happy, and she's like, and I won't do it. And she puts the Ice Queen on because she knows it's gonna enrage him, and she's hoping one day he'll get mad enough. And they take that out.
I think, again, the motivation becomes different. I felt like in the show, part of why she had blocked him out was because of some kind of an abuse situation, because that's kind of what you see of their relationship. Not so much the tragedy of the two of them being forced into this marriage and miscommunication and the cultural differences. So, I mean, I think that's a very interesting change. It's very interesting how just the medium and time can change.
It's one of those things they just cut for expediency because it would inflate the story too much.
They had to. There's no way to do it. So something I want to point out that happens with a lot of the women that the show doesn't go into, but is in the book that is fantastic, is the women. There's this point where someone, I think it's Mariko, says the men are always right. Whatever they do is the correct thing to do. And so there's this thing that happens throughout, and a bunch of the women characters do it, where the guys have said something, and the women were like, "What about this thing?" And they were like, "No." And she's like, "So sorry, you're right." And they placate them, play into their egos, and then get them to do what they want or like manipulate them. But so many times Mariko's like, "You're right. What you said, when you got mad at me for no reason because." I said, would you like a boy to sleep with, and you had a disproportionate, that was on me. I should have known better. And then she's able to like soothe, and it's just, you see it over and over where different women are like, no, your terrible reaction that shouldn't have happened was absolutely my fault. And it's just like this cultural weapon that the women have, that you just soothe their egos and then you twist them the way you
have to pretend to be the one that, no, it was your idea all along.
Yeah, and it's masterful how it comes across, and it's something like the show definitely focuses on how like women are important, and how Ochiba is able to have the power that she does, that Mariko is able to, be in the situations. You get even more of that in the book. I should have mentioned this before, but I have a hard out today at 12, so I'm sorry.
Maria, what the fuck?
My sister's in town. The book is very explicit about the Blackthorne Mariko romance. Like, you've heard me make fun of it a lot by the sexcation that happens in for a chunk of the book. And it's very explicit, and that is a detriment to the bittersweetness of the story. It is bad. I don't like it. I hate it. I wish it wasn't there. The way it works in the show is Mariko thinks her husband is dead. It also happens this way in the book, but a little less explicitly. And she's like, we'll send a maid in to sleep with Blackthorne. And then she goes in. And then the next morning, Blackthorne's like, that was a great night. Thank you. And she was like, oh, did you enjoy the maid? And then nothing happens between the two of them except a lot of meaningful conversations, glances, looks, but nothing. And then once Buntaro comes back, everything is above board, baby. And then the only time anything ever happens between them again is towards the very end, where Mariko had tried to commit seppuku, but at the last minute it didn't need to happen. But Blackthorne was going to be her second, which is something they added in the show. That's not Yabushige's her second in the book. That is a better distillation of Blackthorne's love for her than any of the bullshit they say to each other in the book.
Oh God, Maria, are you fucking kidding me?
It's beautiful.
Yeah, in the book, they basically go on a road trip and they talk about sex toys. That's about it.
Yeah. No, I'm serious. And they're like, I love thee.
Absolutely. I was never into their romance at all. Like, I was with Fujiko when I read the book the first time. I felt like Mariko has a bit of a main character syndrome. Plus, I think her backstory and her marriage is such a good story in itself. I didn't really feel we needed to have like a sexcapade with Blackthorne.
Yeah, see, the show really frames it really quite well, I think.
And I think
their romance.
It weakens all the stuff about her dislike of Buntaro to have her just sexcapade with, and also it weakens her love of Toranaga, because there's literally a point where she's like, I care about your life even above my liege lord, and I'm like, bitch!
Yeah, and they're clashing over religion and, coming over and beginning to understand each other. That would pop more without the context of love, because love makes you stupid, basically.
What you mean is that big white D.
Clavell.
The D was so good. She forgot all about Catholicism.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And how you're not supposed to commit adultery.
Everyone who has not watched the show, or those who have and would like to relive it in their imagination, the build up to him saying that someone who has expressly said, I don't like this practice, this is dumb, like, to be like, I don't want to kill the woman I love, but she, as soon as she takes off the cross, because the whole thing is, for those of you who do not know, that, if she commits seppuku, which she must do in order to show her loyalty amongst the politics of the moment, will commit suicide and therefore be damned to hell. So he says, I care about you enough that I'm going to look past myself and my trauma that I'm going to definitely experience in this moment, and I'm going to behead you. So that way you don't get condemned to hell because you believe in it, even though I don't necessarily believe in everything.
And she had asked one of the Christian lords who knows this rule that, because how it works is if she slits her, and she goes in the show, they go to do her stomach, but it was her neck in the book. And then before it gets too painful, and the actual killing blow is the beheading portion of it.
Because
so
you lose your honor if you cry out during,
yes.
So they're guarding your honor by cutting off your head.
But for her, the reason it works is by the other person actually dealing the killing blow. It is not actually suicide in that moment. And she asked Lord Kiyama to do it, and he is forbidden to do it by Ishido, the guy, the other machination-y guy. And she's like, okay. And there's, like Katie said, there's this moment where she has to, she's sitting there and she's like, oh God, I'm going to just have to suicide this to do it. So she takes off the cross, and you see, and the nice thing about the show is Blackthorne, he never says, I love her. He never says any of that. It's not explicit. You just see this moment, and he takes up the sword, and he's like, I'll do this for you. And you're just like, even without the romance thing, that's a friend. That is such a bro move. And
that's a soulmate move. That's a soulmate move.
It's so much the culmination, too, of the conflict him and Mariko have had throughout the series of him being like, why do you do these kind of things? And she's like, you can't just be, you can't just go on your own freedom kind of a thing. And earlier in the episode, he was like, don't do this. This is really dumb. Just don't do this for me. And she just kind of looks at him, and you kind of get the sense that, it's she has emotions behind the sevenfold fence. And so again, in that moment, and this is a thing about that I want to contrast between all of the books we've read on this channel and the romance between Mariko and Anjin is that it's so much better. There's a subtlety, there is a growth, there is a natural progression of them bonding as intellectual beings and getting to know each other. And in this moment, he is choosing to do something very selfless to respect the way she sees the world, and he's kind of come to understand that. And so there's a greater and even just basic things like afterwards, when he's helping her up like with his hand, and then she puts her hand like this or something like that, and it's just
And
Yeah.
and I was just like, oh my god, like I got
fucking
tingles. Like
cried.
that's so much more romantic than every
It's so subtle.
yes, than every kissing scene we've read. Yeah, and the thing is, the show trains you to pay attention to little things like that, and that's kind of what I mean a lot of times when I say that books should lag behind the reader and how much they ship the characters, so that even little moments to you have, there's no fever touch here. There's no like, oh, and then it was so my fingers grazed his and it was scorching. Obviously, because it's also a visual medium, but like that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, where the audience themselves thinks, oh,
Yeah, it doesn't show love by kissing and having sex. It shows love by doing things that show that you respect this person, you care about them, you respect their wishes and their emotions. That is something almost all books miss on.
To have that kind of like soul kinship with somebody else is like so nice. And like, yeah, no, the 99.9% of the romantic-y stuff that we read is just horned up porn.
I wish I could say the book wasn't more like that, but it is. It's a lot of the two of them are kind of into each other, and there were moments where I thought, okay, he's gonna handle this differently. Like for the first half of the book, I was like, okay, I'm okay. They think a little bit too much about each other sometimes, but I'm okay. And then like we hit this point, and it's just like, da da da, like it feels weirdly out of place because it's idyllic. They go on this they're like, while we're on our travels to Edo, we'll just pretend we exist in a world where I'm not married, we're none of this, but the minute we get to Edo, we have to go back to our normal lives. He's not explicit. It's so funny though, the first half, because they split the book into 2 audiobooks in Audible, and the first half ends with, and then she used her mouth and hands in ways he had never experienced. End scene. That's how the first part ends.
Like, the book has such a strong hint of, the sexually liberated Japanese. They're so, they're so into toys and they know all these things he's never seen before. And
Well, what's also very satisfying is to have Blackthorne come to a moment of emotional maturity and psychological maturity and empathy, where he can be like, wow, I am intelligent enough to see from this other perspective, is very gratifying for a main character, which again is why I feel like the lull in the middle of the fucking show really is a detriment to the rest, is because then this is really quite worth it.
I'm not sure which episodes we're talking about. Like, what happens in them?
Yeah, it's like basically the episode from after the interaction between him and the when the pheasant, the drying of the meat and everything, like it's around that point up into the point when they go to Osaka.
Yeah, what happens is there's supposed to be you're supposed to feel the listlessness of his retainers at that point, where they feel like, okay, we're just waiting to die. Why isn't he doing anything? So you're kind of supposed to feel a little frustrated with him.
Yeah, and Toranaga is kind of deteriorating because he's playing this long game, and everyone's getting anxious because they want Crimson Sky and they want to live, and it's supposed to make you feel their doubt.
It's effective because you do feel that way like them, and you also, and then so when Toranaga is, you're like, oh, he does have a plan, it feels really cool, and then that sets up. But it does feel a little listless in the moment, and it also doesn't help that that's, I think, where Blackthorne recedes the most. Like, he really has nothing to do in those 2 or 3 episodes. So I do get what Katie's talking about. I think in the season as a whole, I think it functions well. So I wanted to go off over 2 things for sure before Maria leaves. One is I want you to describe the scene with the chicken that you spoke of, because that just, if you have not read the book, that just sounds so hilarious.
No, this happens early on, and we get half of this scene in the show.
Oh, is it the duck scene?
Yeah, the duck scene. That's exactly
Oh my
the
god,
scene.
I love the duck scene!
It's so good. So there's this point where they're like, listen, he hasn't had sex with anyone and pillowing is very important for health. So we need to get him. And she tried it first where she was like, originally she was like, do you want a lady? Do you want a boy? And he gets so angry and
really angry because, you don't, you're sodomy, it's forbidden and shit. And they're like, okay,
puritanical.
maybe he's impotent. That's
Yeah.
I go, ask him if he's impotent. And she asks him and he just blows up.
And he has such a negative reaction. They're like, oh God, we can't ask him anything. Because then one of the samurai are like, okay, because the samurai, it's funny, he's like, I am in charge of this man's happiness. Mariko, why is he angry? What did you do? And she's like, I just asked him if he wanted, and they're trying to troubleshoot what's wrong. And so then at one point, he's like, and they're like, well, what if he likes to like goats or something?
Yeah, like the Koreans, they're into goats.
Yeah. Or like, what about a duck? And then she's like, I can't ask him. What if he gets even angry? And the guy goes, I know. I'll just go get a duck and we'll just put it in the room. We'll just put it in the room and we'll walk out. And then, if he doesn't do anything, then we know.
Oh my God, I cannot believe they did not include this scene.
If he doesn't do anything, then we know. And then if he does something, he doesn't need us to know about it and we'll just be good. And she's like, oh my, but it's this hysterical, like, because they're frantic. They're like, oh my God, he's angry. How do we make
That's hilarious.
Wait, so how does the duck thing work out?
They don't do it. She's like, let's just wait it out. And eventually they realize he does like women. He just at that moment didn't. And eventually he will sleep with like people. But it's just the idea of them just putting a duck next to Blackthorne and just being like,
yeah.
Are you gonna fuck it?
It's so funny, and the reason he's saying no this whole time is because he's Christian. It's like one of those culture it's so hilarious. Ugh.
Yeah, that's a great cultural clash into the comedy.
It's so funny, man.
I genuinely wish they had done that scene too, because that sounds like genuine comedic gold.
I think maybe they don't want to do the Korean thing, They call them garlic eaters, and they're really nasty towards Koreans. And historically, there's a lot of tension between Koreans and Japanese. So I think that might be why they cut it. Possibly.
Yeah, okay.
I think also it would break the tone a little bit. Like, that's very madcappy, and I think the book seems to have an expansive enough tone.
The book is so funny. Like, the book is so... It mixes comedy and serious political scheming so well, but I guess that's kind of hard to get in a show. Maybe
I also like how that kind of it explains the culture a little bit different. Like, yeah, he's homophobic in a way that we wouldn't be nowadays, and that's again a way that English culture at the time is not our culture now. Which is that does sound very funny.
The thing that I saw is that there is a kind of schism between like of Japanese opinion. As with anything, there's multitudes of opinions, but there is a lot of there was the two main opinions that were there were a lot of joy at Sanada Hiroyuki's work, and that in Japan, historical dramas have kind of fallen off. They don't get made as much, and the quality isn't as high as you see here. And so for them, it was this return to a beloved genre that they don't see as much, but with all the like trappings of the Hollywood budget, and that Sanada was he is such a respected actor. And then a lot of people were like, this is a much better use of Sanada than in Last Samurai, and this is a much better story for him than in Last Samurai. So there was a lot of, and like, I'm glad that this thing that is so, like, this is Japanese history that all of us know in a lot of detail, because the Battle of Sekigahara is one of the few singular battles in history that completely changes the power of a realm. You have the Battle of the English one, but with the War of the Five Roses, and there's a couple where it's just one battle that and suddenly a complete other power is in control. And the Battle of Sekigahara famously is one of those. There was peace, then there was the Battle of Sekigahara, and Tokugawa walked out of that fucking shogunate, like Shogun. Like, it was a huge historical touchstone. And so they were like, oh my God, maybe this will get like other people interested in Japanese history. So there was a lot of excitement with that. On the other side, there were people worried that how brutally the Japanese have tried really hard in the past few years to kind of rehab their image internationally and try to distance themselves from some of the brutality of World War II and the Japanese-Korean interactions. So they looked at this and saw like the beheading, Omi beheads someone like immediately, and the real, and that this would make people think of them negatively and have bad connotations. There was also a feel that this was too Hollywoodified. It didn't feel as like the actual historical dramas, that there was this other thing added to it. So there's definitely like a separation in like a divide. From what I saw kind of in the video I watched, pretty equally where they discussed. And so it's really interesting that you have these different, like the excitement to share history and then the fear of the
judgment
by
Stereotype too.
and having that, and all of that worry, and that, is this, a Japanese story being used for Western enjoyment. The other thing that I thought was really interesting was how, when this book originally came out, it made a lot of people sign up for Japanese history courses, and like across the country in the US, and I'm sure the globe, people were piling into Japanese history classes, and the professors were like happy about it, but at the same time very cautious, like listen, Blackthorne, and like there's literally like where they would have to start and be like, here's what the actual thing was, and so there was that kind of division.
Up.
Yeah, people didn't understand fiction.
It feels very historical, and the way Clavell writes is very and it's just because he's telling a story, but has a sense of like authority, and so people walked away from that thinking they had a good idea.
So what you're saying is that people watched Game of Thrones and then walked into a medieval history class and was like, okay, where are the dragons?
More so because this does follow a lot of story beats of what happened.
Yeah.
Ochiba, the actual Ochiba, pulled her support away from Ishida to Tokugawa, which made a big difference in that. There's a lot of things that actually happened that match, and it's enough that things get real muddied, and so, but then there's like small details that aren't like the naming
So it's hard for
conventions.
people.
He's almost such a talented writer that it becomes a problem that he feels like he's writing a real world versus.
That's pretty
Yeah.
impressive,
Exactly.
honestly.
Yeah, he's really writing a kind of satire that satirizes all the cultures portrayed in the book, but it feels authentic. So I understand that people kind of conflate it with real history.
Obviously, none of us are Japanese, so there's an extent to which we're coming at this from a different place. But I think it helps. I think the reason the series is, relatively positively received from a Japanese perspective, and then also I think can just objectively be said to be quite good, is that Clavell himself seems to have a real respect and interest in Japanese culture, even if he does, do some of the Japanese names wrong or whatever. And then having so many Japanese people on the show itself, and creatively as well early on, means there's another level of authenticity to it. Like you were saying, they fixed some of the names. The scene where Toranaga's lieutenant dies, he kills himself. He that was actually his whole casting was leading up to that scene, because I already forgot his name, but Toranaga's actor has a personal relationship with him, and they have worked together for a long time. And he said, there's going to be a moment in the series where the audience needs to be able to see them look at each other and feel that fellowship and kinship, and you need to just be able to instinctively get that. And so, that's how much influence he had.
Which was true. That happened.
That scene is gorgeous.
It is.
And so, that I think really helps bring it in terms of, because we've read so many books on this channel that even when written from people in that culture are pretty terrible at portraying that culture authentically. And I think that's two things that really help this adaptation stand out.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to the fact that Sonata was one of the people who was the spurred on this production and looked at it and went, and there are just things that they fixed and they made more historically accurate to the time period. One thing that I saw come up a few times with the Japanese response was that a samurai's wife would never have been that close to the Anjin and hadn't been initially. The level of respected that the historical Mariko was at, she never met him. Why completely separate. And so I think the other thing that like the one of the things the show did well, and I think is a conscious thing, is pull back on their romance. And it preserves like both characters, and so I think that helps. But you really feel the heart and like the soul of like the creative team, like the love that they had for this. This wasn't even filmed in Japan. I for filming purposes, they had
It's
to
so
do...
gorgeous, though.
Yeah,
I was like, how not? It's so pretty.
I think it's Canada, but you get the love, the just with everything, how much they loved and the care that was taken into this. And
they rotated the apple in the fruit decor in the background to the point where the shine was just so perfect that you understood the emotional feelings of the apple.
And for me, it is the best adaptation of anything I have ever watched. Like, it is the most perfect adaptation. And there are ways in which it is weaker by being in this visual medium, but it is incredible. It has to shave things away. There's no way we're getting 52 hours into 10 hours. It had to shave things. And this is the most successful book to TV/visual adaptation I have ever come across. And as I prepare to leave, that's where I leave you. Go watch it. I love you all. Continue
Goodbye.
talking.
Abandon us. Bye.
The one thing I had wanted to talk about, but I guess we can't talk about it because Maria left, is that it is the ending and how it uses the it's more of an emotional Okay, so you're building up this whole time to a battle scene, the Battle of Sekigahara, as Maria was saying, and you're like, and so towards the end of the series, I think about how like we were like 2 hours before the end, and everyone was like, how are they going to wrap this up this quickly? And like, how are you going to be able to fit in all of this plot material so quickly in an emotional thing? And even towards the last episode, I was like, how are they going to do this? And so instead of having the battle on screen, you just get told about what happens in the battle. And that shouldn't work. You shouldn't be able to set up an audience's expectations for a big climactic scene and then steal it from them without leaving them feeling unfulfilled.
Don't do that. Most times,
but this time it works. And I think there's a
Yeah.
couple of reasons. And so even Maria had been like, I'm so excited to see this battle on screen. You never get to see it. And I had finished the series before her. And I was like, we'll see. And here's why it works. Because I think partly it's due to two things. One is the framing. So the place you're told this is when Yabushibe is going to kill himself, and it's just him and Toranaga. And so there is such a sense of the emotionality of the moment of this man going to his death and him wondering about the future. And so when Toranaga reveals what his plan is and how it will work out in the future, it is true to Toranaga as a master kind of manipulator or a falconer. And it also, there's already this heightened emotion. And the other reason I think it works is because we came to this series for a character drama. It's not like we've had battles up to this point, really, or a lot of action. This has been a character and a politics drama or story. And so for it to end in a politics and human drama way, I think really works. It doesn't feel anticlimactic. It feels like you get shivers in that moment of him describing what's going to happen. And you get the emotional climax of like Anjin almost killing himself, and then the scene with Fuji in the boat as well, which are just gorgeous scenes.
basically what Will is saying right now. So I'm basically agreeing with you. But I actually, since you're bringing up the ending, and so I personally felt very deflated throughout the series once I hit that like lull that I keep bringing up, but it was very influential upon me. It made me stop watching it for a while. There aren't a lot of shows that I stop watching in the middle of a season of, but at the end of the season of. So it was like quite surprising to me that I had grown like disconnected from it in a way, because it felt very powerful in the beginning in some ways. But that last episode did so many things so good. And the thing is I think it pays off all of the commitment you have given to characters that they have built up for. So there's a lot of emotional maturation and also wish fulfillment in ways, because who wants John Blackthorne to go back to England? No one. No one fucking wants him to go back to England. Like, so him sailing off into the distance would in no way be satisfying. So him pulling out the ship, but then also being supported in being pulling out the ship But then also making eye contact with Toranaga and being like, this is, oh God, okay, this is the beginning of just more tennis matches between us. It's very satisfying because it's like, but the story goes on. Especially considering the episode shocked me to my fucking grave with fucking Blackthorne in his deathbed, listening to his great-grandchildren or whatever the fuck, being like, "Hey, great-grandfather, is it true that a barbarian gave you these things?" And I was like, ew. And I'm looking at John Blackthorne in his deathbed, and I'm like, oh, fuck all. Don't give me him in his fucking deathbed at the end of this finale. But it doesn't.
I had heard, and I was rewatching YouTube clips for this, my favorite moments, and somebody was saying that actually that death scene doesn't happen. That's him thinking about it, and when he lets go of Mariko's rosary, it's him going, "Oh, I'm leaving behind this idea that I'm going to go back to England."
Yeah, I read it was a dream because he has the rosary and the cross, but then he let it go.
So that's funny that you say that because that makes so much more sense. Because you have to understand, I just watched that this morning from a fairly large pause in the series that I took. So it took a hot second. I had to rewatch the scene from the previous episode and then watch this episode. And even then, that, you know what's funny is that it's not that it didn't occur to me, but it felt like a poetic interpretation of what he perceived to be his regrets in life. And once, of course, he let go of the rosary, I'm like, oh, well, it can't possibly be that future self of him because he had the rosary in his older version self. But I really, you know what I really liked? I just don't think it was I don't think it was the best portrayed for a layman watching this. It's because there was a little bit of confusion that I had, but I really liked how, so there's this one scene for those of you who have not seen it, where John Blackthorne is about to commit seppuku, the scene that we've described before. And in that moment, I really like the acting and the direction of it, how he looks to the side. And as he looks to the side, he has like the flash forward of his elder self dying in his like horribly boring deathbed of like his conquest that never really came to any fruition of like self-worth or happiness or fulfillment. And he hears that like roaring, and I'm glad they picked the ocean, because prior to this the ocean was like a place of freedom, but instead in this moment it's a place of entrapment or blinding, or like it's almost like he's deafened to nothing but this horrible future. And or either that, or I suppose you can interpret it as, no, it's the calling of the sea, and it's not that he's going to go to, but instead the wonderment of the sea. I suppose there's two ways you can look at it. And when that happens, I was like, oh, that's really good. That's really, really good. But no, that didn't occur to me that was his perceived future.
No, it didn't to me either. I mostly just thought it was like, okay, that's a weird non sequitur, but yeah, it makes more sense if it's a vision.
That's the one scene I didn't understand at all from the show, because I'd read the book, so I know how it ends, and I didn't even really understand it when I saw the scene where they released the cross into the lake.
Okay, that makes me feel better.
A bit confused about that, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's not as clear as it could be.
I want to ask you this. Did you like the ending of the show better than the book? And in general, which one do you think is the best version of itself?
I think when I first read the book, the ending was pretty anticlimactic and a bit unusual. It felt like we sort of just dropped off before the story was finished. Whereas in the show, I do feel like they tied up Blackthorne's and Jin-sama's character arc nicely with that scene with Mariko's cross and Fuji's urn. And I think not showing the battle works because they have invested so much time into building Toranaga as this clever master planner. So it feels kind of authentic that he just sees the path the battle is going to take, and that's how it's going to be. And the ending that we get is really the character arcs. So I think probably the show trumps the book.
Maria also said that the ending was a little bit better in the show than the books. Really, she liked it more. I think also it's a cool moment because you finally see the veil lifted from Toranaga in terms of what he actually thinks. And this whole time you've been kind of trying to figure it out. So it's such a moment. You get a sense. I loved the way that he emphasized Mariko's role and that her power was really. He says something about like it didn't take armies, it took one woman's life, and I thought that was so validating too of the female perspective that the show has been doing up until that point.
You know what's funny though? As like, I get what you're saying with that, but I also felt like it was also simultaneously very demeaning.
In a way, it's like, oh, the pretty woman dies for the war. That's kind of how the story always goes, isn't it? Just think back to A Grace of Kings, where that lady was made to seduce Mata, and then just had to go kill his brother, and I don't remember exactly what happened, but that is kind of always the way a beautiful woman goes in these kind of stories. Like, she's obviously not a warrior, so her one way to impact the story is to fall in love with the right dude and then die.
Or to serve the right dude and die. And at the same time, like, it's both give and take. It's neither here nor there. It is both empowering and not empowering because of the mixed dichotomy of the nature of the death. And that's fine.
Yes, and her role and importance as a samurai and like the visual impact of a samurai dying this way, that did set off. That was a gun that went off nicely. So it's a bit of a dual sword, actually.
I guess I just haven't really run into that trope that much, so I didn't really think of it that way. I think Grace of Kings is maybe the only other time I've seen it. But, I think it's something where I also really, it helps reveal Toranaga's and Mariko's relationship and that he had such a deep respect for her, and in many ways she is the only person that he really shared his plans with. Like, everybody else is kind of wondering what he's doing throughout this whole thing, and he's kind of using them, and for her it was like, no, can you do this thing for me?
He does have this deep respect, but he still uses her. That is him. That is the character. Like, he uses everybody, he uses everything to get to where he wants to go.
I agree, but I think in terms of there is a chess master like strategy he has for all the other characters, as he says, like he uses the falcon metaphor that like Yabushibe and Anjin are goshawks at one point, but I think for Mariko and her ultimate like sacrifice and going there and stuff like that, there is an extent to which he asked her to do this. He let her know what was going to happen instead of manipulating her. He still used her.
And in a sense, he let her fulfill her destiny that she has wanted. Like, she has asked him every year to be allowed to kill herself.
The only thing I find is that it's narratively very poetic and perfect, and I'm fine with it, especially the visual part of it in the show. It's because, of course, I haven't read the book, but like her dying in the shape of a cross in full white in night garb, perfect. Like, I mean, yeah, very beautifully visually and everything. But at the same time, it's very, like, I still felt frustrated. It's because while I feel very satisfied as, like, a critiquer, as somebody who's like, oh, did all the little lines line up? Oh, it lined up quite nice. Yes, that's great. But as somebody who also genuinely very much, like, enjoyed the character and such, and kind of, like, it felt a little empty in some ways. Like, it felt very like it didn't and it did. And the emptiness only helps towards the narrative. So it is fine, but it's just also in a way frustrating.
I think another issue with it is that if you don't know that she dies, I knew she dies, then the moment doesn't have the same impact because you're like, oh, she's not going to stay dead. Like, next episode, we're going to come back and she's
I
dead.
knew she's going to die.
Right, but for most of the people watching it, they're like, oh, wow, one of the main characters is not going to stay dead.
Yeah, her death is very shocking. When I read the book, I was just so shocked. I had to, put it down for a while because in the book, her story very much isn't finished, and then she dies. And at first, that is extremely shocking and doesn't feel satisfactory.
See, I felt like they were building up towards it in the show a lot, though. Like, there were so many little, oh, no, she's not going to die. she's not gonna die.
They made you feel that direction for her.
Even I was like, well, maybe they'll change it from the book. Like, and so the moment doesn't quite have the same power. It also feels like, it feels weirdly kind of like we just got past the point where she was going to have this climactic moment and you thought something new was going to grow from that. And then it's like, no, she's still killing herself. So it's something that I think I will like more on rewatch than I liked on initial watch because it'll feel more cohesive as a whole. But the series really is so good and its meditations on death and duty. Was there anything we didn't get to that you wanted to, Limber? Any other big differences from book to series?
Later on, when he does get his ship back and his crew, we see a lot of tension because the Anjin has 200 retainers, vassals, with him. So he's interacting with his vassals and with his crew, and there's a lot of clashes because his vassals, they respect him, they obey, they look after him, and his crew, they question everything.
Oh, I want that. I wanted that. That's what I wanted. I felt like the scene between him and his crew was fair enough because of the show. They gave such little screen time and care to the crew that it was okay. But simultaneously, I was like, oh, but I was excited for this moment. And I felt like I got cheated of that really exquisite comparison.
They just punched each other out in the alley and then what?
It's a streamlining thing, but yeah, that would be such an interesting contrast. It's one of these things I think again where like you lose Blackthorne a little bit because there's more of a focus on the Japanese characters.
I think it was the right idea for them to focus on the Japanese political scheming because that is the heart of the story, really. But many of the decisions they made with what to cut sort of made a large portion of Blackthorne's character arc kind of just disappear. So he's just sort of traveling along.
One thing I think it's interesting is that it's been announced that they're going to be doing a second season. Originally, they said that there was not going to be a second season, and so now they are. And I'm wondering if some of this material that they left out of the first book or the first series could be incorporated into the second, like more of that kind of a...
How?
I hope not. I have a theory.
Yeah.
Possibly season 2 could follow the events of Taipan, which is the second, well, technically, chronologically, it's the first book in his series about the Asia. But if we think of the timeline in the books, Taipan happens a couple of 100 years after the events of Shogun.
I was going to say.
And it shows the first English free harbor in China. So that would be a direction they could go for season 2, because then we get a new cast, we get a continuation of the story, we get progression. If they're just going to make up new things for Shogun, I am actually kind of afraid.
For me, the first season exists in its own little beautiful bubble. And so, like, I don't think future seasons can ruin it for me, but I think, I don't know, the creative team is really strong and there's history that they can follow, you know what I mean? They're not totally making up new things. I would have preferred if they didn't, but...
The story of John Blackthorne should have ended there, though.
Yeah, and this is the story of the political scheming that leads up to the establishment of the shogunate. What's the season 2 going to expand on? Like, the story's done.
No, I agree, and part of it also is they've burned a lot of characters that otherwise you might have wanted to keep around. But there are still stories I think about, like how does working the first shogunate. See, I don't know, because the story is so well contained that I just don't think it needs more. I'm not super looking forward to it. I don't think it could necessarily be bad. Really, what I don't want them to do is create storylines just so that there can be new storylines in the future. Like, TV shows almost function like an organism in that they want to continue on, so they'll just set up things to then set up new things, whereas Shogun had a very specific, like, no, this is the beginning, everything we're setting up pays off in the end. And so I would have preferred if they didn't, but maybe they can do something interesting with it.
I really hope they just jump to China.
I don't think they can. This show is called Shogun.
See, the thing is like, they ended on such a hard note with Toranaga looking... I mean, look, you can't continue an ending like that. The ending was almost like a classical book ending in a show version. And it even ended, like, I know this is dumb, but even just formatting wise, it ended on Shogun. That's the end of it. That's the end of Shogun.
I mean, you could do a time skip of like 50 years, 100 years, and you could come in with like the descendants of these people, possibly, and make up a new political scheming story vaguely based on history. I mean, yeah, it is kind of cheap, but it's a way to make more of this without ruining what the book established like.
I think that would actually probably be the best option, is like, okay, this is about his sons or something like that, you know? Something where it's like, it gets us to do a whole different, it's connected, but it's not. There was recently a, I don't know, some historical drama that I watched the first season of, and the second season of, they like kind of just followed the kids who at the time were born in the very first season, and it was kind of like a loose, it's connected because the name is there, but basically they're just using the momentum of the TV show to tell a new story in a similar style.
Inevitably, that's what you end up with, yeah. But you could jump 2-3 generations, and you could show how the politics we see in this first generation have changed the future.
I'm kind of like grossed out / disgusted by like series that just go on too long. It's such a like, I don't know.
Same. It's just milking that poor dead cow for all it's worth and ruining the golden shine of it in the long run. I wish they would not. I want, if they're gonna make a continuation, make Taipan. You have the script. You have the script written by the same man. You have the same kind of character essences to build off of. Like the main character of Taipan is a fascinating dude. You could make something really great of that.
I think that would be the best thing to do, creatively speaking. Again, I don't think they can, because Shogun is very much a Japanese name.
It's called Shogun.
Yeah. I think the second best option would again be doing something with like their children. That's essentially just, okay, we're using the cultural momentum to tell a different story in Japan at the time. And then the third best option would be like, they're just following, like,
here's the battle.
The battle went by. We're now past it. Now I would literally never watch that.
And half of the good characters are dead guys, but you know.
And like, what, we're gonna follow Buntaro? It's like to see if he gets like a new wife.
You still have Omi. But the show made so little of Omi that no one cares. No one wants to see what he gets up to. And no one really wants to see Blackthorne just marry some other Japanese lady and move on with his life.
Yeah, no, I just don't care about Blackthorne at this point unless he becomes like a super epic, intense anime character.
He needs to marry Fuji. That she decided to go back.
She's gonna become a nun.
No, she decided to turn back at the last moment after.
They pretty much put a hard period on that possible future. Like, they were very clear that there is not that kind of relationship.
No, you don't know. That's not. There was space open because he showed her how to bury her, you know, her family, and so she could get that piece.
She was going to become a nun.
Yeah, but she got the piece from being on the boat, and so she's decided to embrace life and to continue to try to live, even though her.
Have you seen that Will's already started writing his fan fiction?
I am not opposed to Mariko, Blackthorne, and Fuji as a tricycle.
Will's a romantic at heart, Lindbergh. Like a sweet, like hold hands in the dark romantic.
That is slander. In all, I really loved this series. This is the best television I've watched in the longest time. It does so many things with storytelling well. I do kind of wish I had read the book, but it's so long. I just don't want to get through it.
Yeah, I gave up on that shit real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really glad that we had that Maria was able to read it, and then Lindbergh's here, so we have a book perspective, because it really does sound like Clavell is such a talented writer. And a lot of the DNA of the series is in there.
It's such an easy read. Like, the prose is so unpretentious. It just flies by, and there is so much comedy to sort of lift the narrative. And even though a lot of the book is just introspection and like the characters thinking about what they have learned from these events, it is so breezy that it goes by really quick. So I would encourage you to at least look at it if you're interested. Like,
maybe every once in a while we'll take a break from our new A Song of Ice and Fire hour and do a Shogun intermission. That could be interesting.
My final thoughts would be that I love the book. It's not perfect. It has a lot of stuff you could just cut out. It has some weird sexy things like, oh my god. And around Jin-sama's penis, but the book is fascinating because of how much energy it puts into making fun of all the cultures. It's very much not a white culture coming to the weird Japanese. It's more of a study in how hilarious our cultures are, whereas the show is just a great epic of this very iconic time in Japan's history, if you want a vaguely historical version of it.
I think that's a very good thing. I think the show epicizes it a little bit, and it's really good in doing that. But it sounds like the book has a little bit more of a little bit more of a scholarly air almost, and is more willing to play with the absurdities of it.
Culture comedy is how I think of it.
And that is it. We love you, our parasocial darling.
Bye.
Bye.